just wanted to get out of my hometown of like Humboldt County, really. And I knew people there. Some people that I'd grown up with had gone to UCSC and then come back. And then, so I would go down to Santa Cruz with them to visit, and I would meet people there. And then when I wanted to really get out of my hometown, it just seemed kind of natural to move there.
Yeah, I mean, you're from up north, right? Like Humboldt, Eureka area.
Yeah.
So like Santa Cruz isn't a huge leap when it comes to certainly not the lifestyle, I would assume.
Yeah, no, it was pretty exciting actually. There's a lot more going on down there for sure. Closer to San Francisco, so it was pretty cool. Yeah, it was a lot more going on there. It was great.
Was that sort of part of your earnest attempt to actually make a living at this whole music thing?
No, when I moved down there, not at all. I just kind of wanted to leave Humboldt, basically.
So at what point was it clear that music was actually something that you could really do for a living? In quotes, right?
Yeah, definitely in quotes. I think right about the time that, I think when my first record with Drag City, I decided I was going to have to go on tour for so long that I'd have to pretty much quit any job. So I was working at Streetlight Records in Santa Cruz. And then so I just said, all right, guys, I'm going to take off. Maybe I'll be back. And I just never went back.
Given what you do musically, did it seem like there would be a market for it at all?
Not at all. Not when I was doing the early records or anything. I mean, not at all. From then to like this month, I'm like, this might be the last month, and then just something weird happens. I'd be like, oh, do you want to do something? Or I don't know. But yeah, every month I'm like, I don't know if I can do this anymore.
God, it has to have been like 25 years or 20 years at this point. It still honestly feels that touch and go.
Yeah, because it feels like it's slightly like decreasing little by little. And then but then always something, I was just talking to somebody like last year, I was like, oh, that's it. Especially with COVID, I said, oh, and then just weird stuff came up. So now I do kind of not even try to predict it. And I'm not trying to be a pessimist about it, but it would never surprise me if I'm like, nothing is happening. I gotta quit going on tour. But even like I didn't go on tour last year and stuff still kind of worked out with different projects. So, I mean, I'll always do music. I just don't know if I'll be able to support myself with it.
I think there's a line between being a pessimist and being a pragmatist. And there's a certain, in order to kind of just survive in the world, especially to survive in the world making music, there is a certain level of pragmatism that has to take place.
Yeah, I try to be real about it. I think that I've been doing it for so long that there will always be some little remnant or fossil of something I've done that somebody can pick up, from like 15 years ago or something. They might not know what I'm doing now, but somebody will hear something from a while ago and think, oh, maybe I could ask this guy to do this or something, something like that.
What were those things that came through over the past year that kept you afloat?
Well, I started like working on library music a little bit for KPM. It's kind of production music. So there's a history of doing these things called library records back from like the 60s, and where people just do music specifically to be used in production. And whether it's someone could use it for a documentary, a movie, commercial.
Like licensing.
Yeah, that sort of thing. So that just kind of came up. And then after that came up, then my label Drag City said, oh, well, we'll license it from the guys who like to license it. So, weird stuff starts to move around.
I tend to think of stuff like that. Stock is the right word, but that sort of licensable, almost like bed music, as being something that would be almost kind of purposefully generic.
Yeah.
I guess if Drag City is sort of picking it up to do their thing with it, then there must be.
That's why I really liked it. It was a real challenge. And as someone who, because I'm somewhere in between, an idiot and still hold on to some kind of punk rock ideals, I've fully turned down commercials before. People have asked for music for commercials, and I've said no, even though it seems like it doesn't matter. Like I have so many contemporaries that are doing, but I just never did. But this excited me because it wasn't using something from my catalog. And then my idea behind it was I was actually going to throw everything into it and make it as much of mood music and really something that could be a Six Organs record. I wasn't going to just try to make it generic. So I was trying to pull the old flipperoo on it, You know what I mean? Like, and that was the challenge, to see if I could make something that was, just as emotionally fulfilling or whatever as a normal record.
Are companies looking for something generic? Just from the standpoint of, I assume that they want something that can kind of disappear into the background, that doesn't sort of detract from whatever it is they're doing or selling.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't think a lot of people used it. I get the reports. I think like a fishing show used it or something. It had to do a bit with the label KPM was that I did it for, is one of the original library labels, and I think the stuff they used to do from the 60s and 70s and these jazz records, they ended up getting sampled a lot, and then that sort of thing got kind of hip in a way, the older stuff, and it's being reissued. And there's a guy who works there, a guy named Paul, and I think his idea was, oh, I want to make contemporary library music kind of as hip now as when we look back. So he's been asking more indie underground people to do it. I think you'll probably start seeing more underground artists, say, oh, I did a library record, because it's fun to do as well, to take part in that sort of trajectory.
Can something like that be fulfilling in the same way that, making a record is?
It totally was. I mean, that was my idea, was that I would not come at it, thinking, hey, this would be maybe a toilet bowl commercial could use this song, although that's always in the back of my head. I can't stop it. I like that. Maybe I'm a bit of a masochist in that I thought, like, oh, I'm going to put as much into this music as possible, and maybe it'll end up on a toilet bowl commercial. I can't, who cares? Toilet bowl cleaner commercial, I like that challenge. I thought it was pretty fun.
I mean, it sounds like you weren't just doing a Six Organs record in the guise of library music. For you, what's the key differentiator in terms of what the actual end product is?
It's funny because a lot of Six Organs stuff has, there's a lot of dissonance in it. And I usually obscure any sort of pretty melodies or anything like that with some sort of harsh noise. So basically, I just didn't obscure anything. So it really is almost like the skeleton of most Six Organs stuff, but without me throwing a bunch of stuff to throw people off the trail of prettiness. You know what I mean? So that was sort of the idea behind it as well. If people think like, oh, I like Six Organs, but I like the really pretty stuff, but then it's like, oh no, I did that record, it's a library record, it's not a Six Organs record. That was kind of the idea behind it.
What's your sense of what that impulse is to mess up the prettiness, to, like, as you said, throw people off the scent?
I don't know. My partner says that. My partner is always saying that I do that, so I'm kind of picking up. I'm not so self-aware of it, except for she tells me, she's like, you write these pretty songs, and then you'll like sing about something horrible or do something where it's not so easily listenable. I didn't even realize I was doing that. So after she kind of told me that, I became a little more self-aware of it.
I get a sense that a lot of sort of the impulse behind punk rock, for example, is almost a fear of being too earnest, almost a fear of just being too upfront about your feelings. And perhaps there's a sense of like shrouding a little bit, because otherwise it's really easy to sort of come off as being, I guess, a little too cliche.
I could see that. You could see that. And so I'm trying to think of if there's any punk that, I don't know, but then, well, I can't really speak of emo because I don't really listen to it, but I would imagine.
Sure. I mean, it's a bad example because a lot of punk is extremely earnest, but in a different way. I guess that sort of also plays into the impulse of, this that you were alluding to before, the idea of kind of selling out, which is just generally a non-existent concept at this point.
Nobody thinks in terms of that. I mean, when once you hear Henry Rollins say, like 10 years ago, like, I think people should sell to commercials or something, then you're like, what? Oh, I guess there just is that just doesn't exist anymore.
Henry Rollins is a super interesting example too, because you'll be watching some like TV procedural cop show or something, and Henry Rollins will show up. So Henry Rollins has his own concept, I think, that is independent of the rest of the world.
Yeah, definitely. He's a cool guy. He loves music. So
is part of that impulse, that hesitancy, that you've had in the past to, for example, license one of your existing works? Is it that you sort of have a specific idea what you're making this music for?
I just didn't want, if anyone liked a song, I would think the disappointment of seeing it on a commercial, even if it's just one person, it's just kind of like, what are you doing it for, but then maybe they wouldn't care, so maybe nobody cares anymore. I mean, that was a long time ago that I was turning stuff down. That was a long time ago that people were asking, so who knows, if somebody did now, I'd be like, whatever, who cares, like, or maybe not, I don't know, it's a weird thing, I think about it.
So you feel like that moment in time is kind of past?
I don't know, maybe not, like I'd stop, like I said before, like I always think something's going to end and then something happens. So I don't know.
Do you get the sense that to some degree the hexadecic stuff is an attempt to kind of mess up the prettiness for you?
No. And also like my partner's analysis of doing that, where I have something pretty and mess it up, I don't necessarily agree with, because I always saw Six Organs as trying to merge two different worlds. Not so much there's a messed up world on top of a pretty one, but just, I mean, it started from listening to just different types of records and thinking, I wish I could listen to both of these records at this. I wish there was a record that sounded like Van Morrison's Veed and Fleece and Dead Sea's Harsh 70s Reality at the same time. I wish there was a record, and then thinking like, well, maybe I'll make that record. I mean, I never have, but that was sort of, I've never, been able to create something that good. But that was the idea behind it. Like, what if I wish there was a record that could capture both of these moods at the same time? So that's how I always thought of Six Organ sound world, of kind of combining these things. Not so much of, but that was her analysis, was that you make pretty stuff and then you kind of ruin it. So
what was the impulse?
There was, well, one of the ideas was that there's sort of a trend with composers to take ideas from more folk musicians or folk ideas, or maybe like Bartók taking ideas from Hungarian peasants or something. And I just thought, well, what if maybe the folk guys will take some ideas from some composers without trying to pretend like we're composers at all. So then taking ideas of just more some 12-tone ideas that are more Schoenberg ideas, and then taking ideas of just chance operations, post John Cage chance operations.
Okay, so like the I Ching sort of.
Yeah, exactly. And then saying, well, maybe we'll borrow some of this for us folk guys. That was kind of the big idea behind it.
I got the sense that it was him trying to sort of get out of his own head and get out of his own way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Have you listened to those radio shows with him and Morton Feldman? They did about 5 radio shows. It's really just them talking and bullshitting. And I don't know, maybe they're on mushrooms, because I know Cage was into mushrooms, but you're like, you listen and you're like, they're laughing a lot right now. Maybe they're, kind of start to think maybe they're on mushrooms or something.
What era would that be?
I think it was early 60s. It was recorded. I have to look. It's on archive.org.
Yeah, so. But the mushroom thing makes sense, or even maybe acid at that point. Yeah.
They're really entertaining. It's just like a couple guys talking about, they're just kind of riffing on ideas. It's not even so much composer stuff, but yeah, it's very entertaining.
I sort of came at being interested in the John Cage thing through Brian Eno, and and clearly his deck of cards was sort of inspired by that same idea. I guess developing a set of constraints in order to be more productive in the creation of music. I mean, is that the sense that you have to kind of set your own parameters in order to really sort of sit down and start making something in earnest?
There's definitely an idea of, working with parameters. Eno's cards are fairly, they're definitely more conceptual, and then the hexadic system is more has more to do with the notes and a little less conceptual. Like it gives you a series of notes, so it gives you very specific parameters rather than parameters more like concepts. Um, but yeah, that was definitely an idea behind it.
Is it something that's been useful for your music generally, or is it really just something that kind of exists for those specific sessions?
Yeah, it's like a different part of the brain for me. I People have asked that since I did the hexadic stuff if it influenced other ideas, and it's so compartmentalized in my brain that it hasn't. I mean, it probably has in some way, but it's like that's like a different space that I go into and work in sort of this hexadic space, and then come back and work on other stuff.
Do you find though that just generally when it comes to sort of sitting down and making music that there is an attempt to kind of get out of your own head, to kind of get out of your own way?
I mean, that's the biggest obstacle, is being able to get out of your head. I find that the older I get, the harder it is to get out of my head and leave stuff behind, and my to-do list of mundane things. It's getting harder for sure. It reminds me of a few years ago, I thought I would start playing Dungeons and Dragons again, like I did when I was a kid, and found the books used and stuff, and some people were like, "All right, let's get into it. All right, I'll DM. Let's do it." I started working on it, and I was just like, "Man, I can't get out of my head enough to play this game." It was a total like Winnie the Pooh situation. Like I needed Winnie the Pooh to come around or something. You know what I mean? I was like, oh my god, I'm an adult. I can't get out of. I can't stop thinking about how I don't know, faucet's leaking, and I need to fix that tomorrow. Like, couldn't do it. So it's a little bit like that. I'm noticing with music. Like I'm finding it harder to escape.
How does something like the past year impact your ability to make music?
It's funny. I get just as much inspiration, but it doesn't last. It won't last for more than a minute or two. So I get just as many ideas. I think, oh, that would be cool. What if I should do that? And then in a minute or two, I just think like, whatever. And then I can't keep it. I can't sustain it. What about you? Have you noticed anything like that before with inspiration and doing stuff?
I went through some pretty heavy depression over the past year. I was dealing with some health issues on top of everything else. That on top of the sort of the state of the world, I went through a pretty dark period, dark depression, and found that not only was I not motivated to, I'm a writer by trade. Not only was I not motivated to write, but I also had a period where I just wasn't even able to listen to music.
Right.
Couldn't derive joy out of the stuff that I usually consumed. It was pretty dark there for a while.
Did you go to different stuff, or was there just nothing to listen to?
There was a period of nothingness, and then I found my way again, actually through instrumental music. Which is actually maybe relevant to you and to what you do. I've talked to a lot of people who just generally, who writers specifically, who tell me that they can't write when listening to certainly hip hop, but just music with words in general, because they find it to be super distracting. I found I got really into ambient music a lot and then post rock, and then kind of worked my way up to sort of being able to listen to whatever. But certainly
with writing and inspiration, and how were you able to deal with that last year?
I mean, part of it is just that I have to for my job. Part of it. Again, it gets back to this the pragmatic thing again of like, I live in New York City. I have to pay my rent writing for a living. So I didn't really have the luxury of not being able to work for an extended period of time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I have to imagine on your ends when touring is, such a big, I assume is a pretty key part of your revenue stream, when that just completely goes away. I mean, that must be terrifying.
It was, not being able to tour is a bit. I feel very lucky in that in November of 2019, so a few months before everything kind of went down, I went on a living room tour, which was the first time I'd done that in a long while. And it was so amazing and so much fun to remember to do that. And actually, I remember being in Santa Cruz, seeing amazing shows in living room, and that was one of the inspirations. I was like, oh man, I haven't done that in so long. I've seen so many good shows in Santa Cruz, um, and yeah, I was just thinking about a show with like Little Wings in a living room, seeing little
I
and
might have been there. I saw them at a
I was
few.
just gonna ask. Yeah, I wonder if I forget what that house was.
Is it possible they played with Entrance at one point?
Well, Entrance played with Devendra.
I was at that show. Yeah.
Yeah, seeing good shows in Santa Cruz reminded me to go on that tour, and so I have a bit more of a positive, um, sort of a positive outlook on the future, because although it's super bummer that cool places are closing down, I know that there will always be like a community and some sort of network, and people will always want to see music, and living room shows are great. So maybe, I mean, it's pretty hard to do if you're really thrashing metal band with like three guitar players, and I feel a little more positive about it.
You're in Western Mass now?
I'm actually back in Humboldt.
When did that happen?
Last year, I moved back last year.
Just to be closer to family?
Yeah, exactly. I met so many people on the road. I was like, "What are you doing?" They're like, "I'm moving back home." And I was like, "What are you doing?" "I'm moving back home." And I was like, and then yeah, the folks, I was like, maybe I'll just move back, be closer, help them out on some things.
Obviously, also talked to a lot of people over the past year who said they were moving back, but in a lot of cases, it seemed to, at least in theory, be temporary. Like especially since I'm in New York, there are a lot of people who are like, "Yeah, I'm going to go home and kind of write it out there and come
Yeah,
back when it's all over." But it sounds like this is a permanent or semi-permanent relocation for you.
for now, I didn't. Yeah, I mean, I got my own place. I didn't move in with my parents, which would, I don't know. I don't know how that would be possible. But yeah, so but I moved back into the area. My sister's here too.
Is there a sense in 2021 that you're able to do what you do from basically anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, I've felt that for a while. That's why so after Santa Cruz, I moved to Oakland, and then San Francisco, and then Seattle, and then Western Massachusetts, and then Hartford, Connecticut. So, and then back here.
Why so many moves?
I don't know. It's weird. I would just move. I'd never had a problem with moving, going somewhere new. I think probably, I mean, it's one of the reasons why I moved back, because I kept moving because I was like, I don't know about this place. I'm going to go to another place. And after you live in so many places, you realize every place is good and every place is bad. So you just kind of got to deal with the bad.
Every place is good and every place is bad. I mean, obviously, there's truth to that, but some places are better suited to some people than others, right? I mean, you know there are places that are objectively good for people who.
Yeah, for sure.
I assume that when Comets was still more of a going concern, that there was that was kind of keeping you at least in a sort of a general location, right? There's a difference between being a solo artist and being in a band.
Yeah, I mean, Comets would practice in San Francisco twice a week. So when Ethan lived in Santa Cruz and I lived in Santa Cruz, we would take turns driving up to San Francisco. And then, Ethan moved up to Oakland first. And then driving up to San Francisco twice a week from Santa Cruz gets a little rough. So it's just easier to move to Oakland. That's where Ethan was living.
So was it that sort of official announcement of, I guess, what at least at the time was an extended hiatus that kind of freed you to move wherever you wanted?
I think I can't remember how that lined up. I think I moved after that. Yeah. But yeah, I think we had decided to kind of go on a break for a bit, and then I moved up to Seattle.
It's kind of one of those breaks, like go on a break a bit, and then it like you wake up one morning and it's been like 15 years. It sounds like.
Yeah, and Flashman, the bass player, moved down to Los Angeles, and then so we were really spread out on the West Coast. because I think, he thought we're taking a break, and he always wanted to move to LA. And then I moved really far away to the East Coast, and then yeah. But now actually Ethan moved back here as well. So now I actually see Ethan more than ever, all the time, because he just moved back to Humboldt.
That's exciting, right? The choices that you make musically are kind of based on access that you have to collaboration with others.
Yeah, probably. I think when I was on the East Coast, we still got together for a one Six Organs record. Well, our the Comets guys got together. Um, I Yeah, I don't know. I've had different. Usually, I just ask. Yeah, I think it'll be. I mean, to answer your question, yeah, it'll be exciting because we're close. I don't know if we'll play music together. He's pretty busy and I'm pretty busy, and it's nice kind of not to worry about doing music so much. I'm sure we'll jam and have fun and stuff like that.
What is sort of the process of the early stage of collaboration, and at what point does it like really turn into something more serious and move out of the confines of just kind of screwing around and jamming with somebody?
Yeah, it's weird because I don't like to jam. That's another thing my partner makes fun of me. Like my partner loves to jam. I'm not a big jammer. I like to have a purpose. Say, oh, what are we doing? You got a song? All right. Well, does everybody know what we're doing here? Because I don't want to just go in and jam. I mean, I do.
You two don't just sit around the house and
We
jam?
never jam.
No?
No, we never jam. I mean, he makes fun of me a lot about that. I mean, we've done projects together, but I don't like to jam very much. I mean, it's okay. But in terms of collaborations are funny because if I always notice with collaborations, each person kind of wants. The problem with collaborations is each person kind of wants to do the music that the other person does in a way, you know. So they don't really want to do what they do, but the other person wants to do the music that they do, and it takes a while to sort of level out and figure out how that's going to work.
If they just wanted to do the music that they do, then they wouldn't bother
Yeah.
collaborating with you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's two ways, doing that both ways. So that's the problem with collaboration.
It's the problem, but it's also the opportunity, right? I mean, because you were getting at this before when you were talking about the sort of abstract idea behind Six Organs, which was taking these two divergent musical styles and attempting to meet in the middle. And I mean, isn't that at least is the result of a successful collaboration, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say it's the problem with collaboration, but it's the challenge of collaboration is to find that middle point where people, or sometimes you just realize like, oh, this person kind of wants to do what I do, or maybe that person realizes, oh, they want to do this kind of music and they don't want to change. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a directly meet in the middle, but the challenge is to figure out what each person is going to do in their place in the collaboration.
You do have collaborations that fall under the Six Organs banner. What does collaboration look like there? I mean, is there still a certain sense that you are kind of absolutely running the show?
I'm a really bad band leader. So I just kind of give the idea and I just say like, this is kind of what we're going to go for. And then hopefully the person, and hopefully it works out. And if they work out, we do it for a while. And if it doesn't, then this is terrible, but I'm much more comfortable with being like, maybe we will work together. It's like, oh no, I know I didn't give you any directions or tell you what to do, but no, this is over. I don't like to tell people what to do. So it's best if just kind of, but some people, like my friend Rob Fisk, who I've known forever, whenever he plays bass in Six Organs, it's incredible. I can't believe how, I don't know, how he inspires me so much when he plays. So there's stuff like that. But Six Organs isn't usually so much collaboration as it is just trying to get into that Six Organ space. So, but I have collaborated with other people I do this band called Wrongda, and that's a little more collaboration. That's with this guy, Chris Corsano, and this guy, Sir Richard Bishop. And that's a little more collaboration. We're all trying to find like a middle place with what we do there. And I'm trying to think of other collaborations I've done. I'm working on a few right now, so that's why that idea of collaboration is on my mind.
You mentioned as a band leader, you're telling people sort of what the idea is. I think idea is the word that you use, and you also said idea in the context of inspiration. When it comes to making a piece of music, what does an idea mean exactly? You know, I know that's like a really abstract question, but like when you approach somebody and say, hey, you know, we're making this track, what's an example of like an idea that you would give somebody?
I guess it depends on the collaboration. For right now, I'm kind of working with three different people, like straight up, just I don't know what we're going to call it. It's just we're working. And one of my friends, so like I'm working right. I'll just mention one. Like I have a friend named Brian Sullivan who used to do a band called Mouthus, and we're kind of working together right now, and just sending files back. And so that collaboration is starting to form where we're both doing stuff that neither one of us has ever done before, but we've always wanted to do. And since there's no expectations, we're doing a lot of experimentation and then finding out how we can work together in that way, kind of with loops and guitars, but harshness and sequencers and stuff like that. So that's been really fun because I feel like we're both doing stuff that neither one of us has done before, and we're kind of trying to egg each other on. So, and then I'm collaborating with another guy that I have worked with before and played in his band, and so I know, and that's more me just doing what I do with acoustic guitar, and he's just doing vocals over it. So that's easy because then we both we're just playing our own parts. So those are two that are kind of totally separate, different ways to work together, but it just yeah, figuring out how to do it.
Is that remote collaboration, is that a product of the pandemic, or is that something you've been doing for a while?
I've been doing remote collaboration for a while with people. The first one was this project I did called August Born, and I actually did that in Santa Cruz. And actually, do you remember that hip hop band, the Moonies, in Santa Cruz?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, so Rob, who was in the Moonies, had a little studio, and I worked with Rob at Streetlight Santa Cruz. And when I needed to record, I didn't have any recording equipment. So I recorded this whole psych folk record with this Japanese psych folk artist by going over to Rob's house from the Moonies. And I would go into his studio and we would do stuff. And I'd say, Rob, I want to do this. And he would just record everything because he had a really cool studio. And then I would say, all right, give me some history on some underground hip hop. And then I'd sit down, you know, and then he would like school me on some stuff. And we'd be, all right, see you later, Rob. And that's how I recorded collaborations back then. Rob would really help me out. Rob was great. Now I have my own stuff at home that I can work with.
I mean, you were ahead of the curve because that would have been like close to 20 years ago now. And people weren't really remotely collaborating, at least for the most part, in the same way that they are now.
Yeah, we did it in a very funny way in which one of us would record on a CDR and we would send it to each other and we wouldn't even multi-track it. We would just record right over the top of what the other person did and then send that CDR back. So when it came to do the record, there's nothing to mix. You couldn't mix anything. There weren't individual tracks. It was just all baked into it. And then so we just sent it off to a mastering engineer and he just mastered it and said, well, this is the best I can do. And then that became the record.
It's kind of risky, right? I mean, you're recording directly over it. You know, there's not a lot of room for error or something like that, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was really fun. I mean, it was a lot of experimentation and I didn't know it was going to come out as a record at the time. We were just doing it for fun. And we had a funny thing we would do where we along with recording the sound over the top of each other, it started with me sending him a picture of me, like a Polaroid. And then when he sent it back, he had Photoshopped the Polaroid of him holding up the Polaroid. And then I took that, and it was just a series we have this series on top of the CDRs for the cover as they were being sent back and forth. We would do these Photoshops of us on top of each other, which kind of meme-like nowadays. But yeah, it was a really fun project. His name was Hiroyuki Usui. Yeah, it's awesome.
Do you think that potentially a project loses something when it is more serious, when it is something that you definitely know is coming out for a record? I mean, it sounds like you captured something in that collaboration because you didn't know anyone was going to listen to it, that you could really just sort of do it for the sheer joy of making music.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't make a presumption that something would necessarily be lost because you think it's going to be on a record. I think there's probably a lot of great records that people knew that.
Obviously they're great records. I guess I just sort of wonder if, when you start to do something before it becomes a career, hopefully in theory you're doing it because it's something that you're just getting sheer joy out of. Like I know, like for me, for example, I started writing for a living because it was something that that I knew that I was good at, but also just something that I just really enjoyed the process of. Before I was podcasting, I was a KZSE guy. So I did radio for a long time, and it was something that I just really enjoyed. The math changes when something becomes a job, right? When something becomes serious, something you're doing for a living. I mean, I assume that it can sort of be hard to recapture some of that just initial joy. As somebody who doesn't really, as you said before, doesn't really jam with people in that way, are you still able to get that same sense of joy that you did when you first started making music?
Oh yeah, I mean, nowadays it's probably a little different with music because I can just hit record and on anything I do and not think like, oh, this is going to be used for something. But I can have a document of it, erase it, and it doesn't seem as I can still, or I could pretend like I'm not recording at the same time.
Can you pretend like you're not recording?
It's pretty tricky, but no, I can't. You caught me in a lie. There's no way I could do that. It's like this. This is me recording. Record. God damn it. Hit stop. Re-record. Nope. Nope. It's normally like that. Just stop. Redo. Stop. Redo. Stop. Redo. Stop. Redo.
Do you make a lot of music that just never that you don't put out into the world?
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that I do that is for fun. That is not very good. That I don't think anyone would want to listen to, and maybe I don't think anyone needs to hear my electronica EDM records, that I record at 9:00 at night while I'm watching TV and think like, oh yeah, I like this kick drum. Yeah, it needs a little more bass. I don't think anyone needs to hear that record.
What's the impulse behind that specifically? Or I heard an interview, I think you were talking about sort of going back and listening to some of the industrial music that you used to listen to when you were younger and I guess sort of messing around with that a little bit. Is it an attempt to kind of get outside of your comfort zone?
No, I think it's more just have fun. A lot of times it's a challenge too. And then to see if you can do something, to see if you can make a certain sound. And it always comes back. You always learn something. Even if I'm trying to make a genre of music for myself for fun, even if I don't ever let anyone listen to it, or even if I erase the track immediately, it's always a learning experience for something that I can use later on.
Is there an example of something that's just started off completely on a lark? Like, the EDM stuff specifically, it sounds like you had absolutely zero expectation that you were going to put that out in the world, and that was just fine. And is there an example of something that sort of started like that and grew into something that you felt comfortable releasing?
I don't know. There's some tracks on a new record that started off with me just singing into the computer in the kitchen in the middle of doing nothing and just thinking, oh, here's a melody. I'm just going to sing into it, thinking it was just going to be a melody. Later, I just ended up using those vocal tracks and building a song around it.
What was it about them that really sort of transcended that initial just screwing around?
I think I kind of just liked the mistakes in it a little bit, not being able to hit certain notes, the tiredness. It's hard to pretend like you're tired. There was a certain sense like that, like, I'm going to try to sing like I'm exhausted. Like on that last one, it comes off a little too much affect, so it's like, just use the original.
What was the impulse behind wanting to sound tired on the record?
Oh, well, I mean, like when I sang the original one, I think I was kind of tired or something. There was just this, like, maybe because I didn't think I was going to be using it, there was just this non-direct sort of laziness to the delivery when I was just singing right into the computer. And when I tried to recreate that, it just sounded fake. So it didn't work. And if I tried other stuff, I was like, I'll just use the original.
You weren't purposely singing when you were tired the first time, but it came out that way and it just sounded, you listen back to it and you're like, oh no, this is the way it should sound. It should sound like I'm tired.
Yeah, I mean, I probably could have nailed it if I wanted to spend all day trying to recreate a sound that I had already done with slightly better fidelity. Because the whole part of recreating it would also be to make it sound like I'm not trying to recreate something, which is the hard part as well. So I was like, I'll just use the original.
There was an accidental quality to your vocal delivery that you felt like really ended up fitting well into the music that you were trying to make.
I think so. I think that happens with a lot of people who are recording, though. There's constantly, the Neil Young, take the first take, etc. kind of thing. I don't necessarily, I think a lot of that, well, I don't know about a lot, but a good bit of that is mythology as well. I try not to fall into those mythological traps, but sometimes they're real.
I was reading an older interview that you did, and I think the interviewer suggested that you were a spiritual person, which is, certainly an impression that I had gotten just based on your music generally and some of the ideas around it and some of the things that you've talked about. But you really, this was, from a number of years ago, probably 15 years ago, but you really pushed back on the idea that you were a spiritual person. And I think you said, no, actually, I'm not spiritual. I'm a nihilist. And I'm wondering, like, well, which is a great response. Was that in the moment, or is there truth to that?
A certain, I would say, there's a certain form of nihilism which is quite spiritual in itself, anyways. So it depends on how. That's I could say that, but I think it's hard when somebody says that because the word spiritual is so loaded. It's so culturally loaded. You have to ask the person. So I'm just saying back then, it's an easy thing to be like, oh, and it's so, if you hear somebody with acoustic guitar or, so it's a very easy thing to project on somebody or it falls into, it's very easy to say that about somebody.
Sure. And you're from Humboldt and you lived in Santa Cruz and like you were very much exposed to that sort of like post 60s, post 70s hippie culture that's very pervasive up and down the coast.
Right. And exactly. If somebody says like, oh, you seem spiritual. Well, what do you mean by that? It's like, oh, well, it seems like you like to shake a tambourine around and listen to the Grateful Dead. I'm like, well, no, I'm not spiritual. You kind of have to ask somebody like, well, what do you mean by spiritual? Or do you just mean, it's like the word mysticism as well. People say like, oh, it's very mystic. And you have to say like, well, what is your definition of mysticism? There are different ways to look at mysticism. Do you call anything that is out of the material realm mystic? Is that your idea of mystic? Or is your mysticism more narrow and defined and you think of mysticism as having communion with a godhead, like that sort of mysticism, which is different than just, oh, well, it's not a material thing. So when there's these culturally loaded words, sometimes you can ask the person, what do you mean? And then sometimes it's easy to be like, I'm just a nihilist. Back then I didn't like to be
pigeon-holed.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a lot nicer now. I'm not such a...
Feels like a reactionary thing to say. Oh, and yeah. I think you're kind of getting that you were saying it because it was a reactionary thing to say, absolutely. Or is there truth to it?
Is there truth that I'm a nihilist? No, I don't think I'm a...
You don't think you're a nihilist?
No.
Do you think that by your definition of spirituality that you're a spiritual person?
By my own definition? I don't know if I have a specific definition of spirituality. We could say that I just don't like that word spiritual.
This is why it's something that I'm interested in. And this is why it's something that like I've always, that I might have applied that word to you, is that I tend to think of spirituality in terms of like a seeker, of somebody who is, constantly trying to find deeper meaning through whatever means, through, for some people it could be like drugs. For other people it could be, maybe it's religion or whatever you would consider mysticism, or for some people maybe it's music. And I've gotten the sense, at very least, you're a seeker.
I like that definition, and by your definition I would say okay.
You do consider yourself to be sort of a seeker then?
I don't think I have everything figured out. So
part of it is that, I like the idea of music as sort of as transcendence.
Yeah.
And I think that plays into a lot of the music that you make.
Thanks. That's nice of you to say. It's nice. Yeah. I think the problem I have with it is, not problem with anything you've said, but a problem I have with generally, I think I think it's a role that a lot of musicians play to say I'm a mystical dude or I'm an occult, dude or lady, and I'm like, look at me, I have answers or something. And often those people are called spiritual or this. And so from the very beginning, that's the only reason why I really reject that sort of thing, is because, yeah, it's a character, it's a role that I see people play, and I don't really want to participate in that as much.
Maybe the issue with it is that there's an assumption that if a person is spiritual, that they've got some sort of answer, that they possess some information that
Right,
that you
right.
don't possess, and that just sounds like a lot of responsibility. You know,
Yeah.
unless you're willing to be like a cult leader or something, it's a lot of
Yeah.
responsibility to say I have this next level information that
Yeah.
you don't possess.
Exactly. And that said, I think there are some musicians who are definitely seekers and spiritual. I mean, from John McLaughlin and his whole thing. And even, if I saw another guitar player who consistently had to wear white on stage, and I would be like, I don't know about that guy who says he's so spiritual, but John McLaughlin will be like, all right, give you, you get a pass. So I have a constant judge in my brain too. So I'm not going to say, especially in public, who I think is or isn't spiritual, but there's definitely
Sure.
people who, I can't say more who is. I mean, someone like Avon Kang, I think is incredibly spiritual player, Dan Higgs. So there are definitely people out there that even you can tell in liner notes or in their own music what they do, that I would say are spiritual and seekers. So I don't think it's a bad thing if for musicians like that. I just think it's so easy to play that character that I try not to play that character.
Sure. I think the interview I think it was from like 2006. And, we were talking about sort of the kind of early days of Comets and Six Organs. So,
Oh
that
yeah,
would be
2006. I may have been a nihilist in 2006. There was a lot of drinking back then, so I could see if I was caught on a particularly dark night. Yeah, maybe.
yeah. What was going on in 2006 that might have made you a nihilist?
No, I don't know, man. Maybe it was like after a weird show or something. No, I think 2006, I was pretty happy. Maybe I think when I first moved to Santa Cruz, I was probably definitely more of a nihilist.
Was it just like an angry young man kind of
Oh
thing?
yeah, angry young man, angry young man, and that sort of thing. But yeah, whatever interview that was, I was definitely just being a contrarian. You know what I mean? That was probably just that thing I was saying, where I was trying not to present myself as a certain thing.
Part of what I was getting at too, though, is do you feel like in the intervening, decade plus, do you feel like you've got anything more figured out?
I thought you were gonna say, "Do you feel like you got anything more to say?" Which would be amazing if you said that. So you've done a lot of stuff. Are you still going to continue? I mean, come on.
So are you done making music? Is this your final record?
It'd be great. Like,
You look at some people who do that, and you can kind of point to them and say, like, yeah, that dude or lady or non-binary person has something figured out that they didn't before. Like they really got to something else. They really got to some higher meaning, or maybe they, like, to some degree, they found some of the answers they were looking for. And do you feel like at this point that you've gotten maybe a little bit closer, or at the very least, like, it's clear that you've mellowed out to some degree? I say that as a compliment, by the way.
I like it. Thank God. I was like, oh my God. Yeah.
You're wearing a Snoopy cap, for God's sakes.
I am wearing a Snoopy cap. I have mellowed out. I just stole this from my partner as well.
It's a great hat. Yeah.
Thank you. I just stole it yesterday, although it's very dangerous because it's white, which it's not going to be white for probably more than 2 more days. But I feel like I'm going in a different direction than I was probably 15, 20 years ago. But I don't think I really have anything figured out. But I made a deal with God when I was in Santa Cruz, actually, and I said, God, make me happier. If you make me happier, you can make me dumber. Not that I was very smart in the first place, but I was like, make me dumber, but make me happier. And then God really kept up on that deal. I feel like it's been, slowly eroding, intelligence a bit, but happier.
You feel like happiness in this case is a direct result of maybe losing some brain cells?
Could be. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Like, I just know. Yeah, I'm having a hard time remembering words. Just weird stuff that. I mean, like everyday words. The other day, what's the name of that thing where people are like bidding on something and shoot, what's that called? It's like eBay, and it took me 15 minutes to remember the word auction. Just that's happening more and more, which is fine.
It could be age, it could be technology, it could be the fact that like whether or not we know it, we're all pretty depressed over. I mean, the last year, the last 4 years, let's be honest, but specifically the last year, I do think is like at least temporarily.
My memory is just generally not just last year, but my memory is really, really going, and I think memory is so tied to general intelligence that. Like, yeah, I definitely see a decrease in.
I gotta get back to this pact that you made with God. I don't know how literally to take what you're. I don't know you. You know, like we've been talking for about an hour. I don't know how literally to take that. I don't know how literally to take that idea. I mean, is that like, are you talking about actually just sort of like, you know, praying or spiritually communing with a greater power and saying that, or is that just sort of like a kind of a, you know, symbolic?
Well, I wasn't actually in church. It was just one night. I just kind of had this idea.
So this is a thing. This is a thing that one day.
Yeah, I was just kind of like, I would like to be happier. And if you want to, you know, make me dumb, as long as I'm happy, then you can go ahead and do that. And I know that we have currently been talking about how I often say untrue things in interviews, so I can understand how but
it's not even that. It's just a really interesting idea. And it's not ego death, but it is this idea of kind of letting go of something that perhaps you thought sort of defined you to some degree, and realizing that maybe it wasn't a consequential part of being happy for you.
You know what it could be? That I just thought about this talking now from this particular conversation. And I would like to say I didn't consider myself intelligent in the first place, but how this trade-off may have happened might have gone back to playing D&D when I was 14. In your scores, we have intelligence score, and you don't have a happiness score, but you know what I mean? So it could have gone back to that. Like, hey, you know, I'm at 15 intelligence. You can knock that down to, well, it's probably more 12 average. You probably knock that, well, it's probably 12 and a half. You can knock my 12 and a half intelligence down to 10, but this happiness score, you got to give me 2.5 points on the happiness score.
Let's pretend for a moment that there is, that your HP is your happiness.
Oh yeah, that's
percentage.
Good. So I was talking to the dungeon master in the sky, basically.
At this point in your life, where would you say your happy meter is at?
Happy meter's gone up. I like this whole D&D thing, but although my experience level is probably not that high, you know why? Because I have a multi-character class. That's why. So it takes, the more experience points you get in, you know, it takes you longer to go up in the levels. So it's hard to be a thief, fighter, magic user.